Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's ILTA webinar, SharePoint Online versus On-Premise. I'm Gail Persicelli with ILTA, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. Our speaker today is Ted Theodopoulos and Brian Goff from AccuWire. I'd also like to thank AccuWire for sponsoring this webinar. Their sponsorship is vital in keeping the ILTA webinars free to our members. Today's presentation is going to run about 45 to 60 minutes. All questions should be entered into the Q&A box within the Adobe Connect meeting room. And if those are not answered during the presentation, they will be addressed at the end. Before we start, please know that we are recording today's webinar. And if you could take a few minutes to just mute your lines, we would greatly appreciate that. Once the webinar is over, we will post a link to our website under recording shortly after today's presentation. Finally, to see the PowerPoint slides in full screen mode, you can click on the full screen button in the top right-hand portion of the PowerPoint slides. It's a toggle so you can flip back and forth by pressing the button again. Okay, I'll now turn over the webinar to Ted and Brian.
Thank you, Gail. I'd like to also thank everyone for spending a few minutes with us to talk about the topic of SharePoint Online versus SharePoint On-Prem. This was a roadshow series that we did in the first half of the year and delivered to about a dozen cities. We had a great response from that and decided to package up this content and deliver it in the form of an interactive webinar. So let me introduce myself. I'm Ted Theodopoulos, founder and president of AccuWire. Been in business for a number of years, certified Scrum Master, Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. I was on the SQL Server team at Microsoft back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I've been managing SharePoint teams for a little over a decade. And I'll turn it over to Brian to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm one of the solution architects with AccuWire. I've been in the IT industry for well over 20 years, working in a variety of different platforms. I've been working with SharePoint technologies for well over 10 years. And during that time, I was also recognized as a MVP by Microsoft for my contribution to community and the work that I've done with the SharePoint product. So looking forward to working with you folks and hopefully speaking with you after the presentation. Thanks.
Okay, and we've got Jeff Bodum as well, who's on the line. Normally, he plays a role in our roadshow delivery, but he'll be in the background today. And feel free to reach out to him, jbodum@accuwire.com, if you have any questions or you want to get in touch with us regarding services. Okay, so let me introduce the company. AccuWire is an IT consulting firm that is focused on the legal industry. We have three main areas of practice. The first is our intranet-extranet practice, which is all built around SharePoint. As part of that practice, we do pretty much everything related to SharePoint, including farm implementation and design. We do a lot of migration, especially now into the 2013 space. 2016 is right around the corner, so we anticipate there'll be lots of movement there as well. We do portal branding and UX work, custom dev, and custom search implementation. We also have an application development practice, and that's focused on ASP.NET. We do a lot of system integration with legal, a lot of NetDocs work. In fact, we probably know the NetDocs API better than anyone outside of NetDocs, and some mobile work as well. We also have a BI practice, and that's all built around Microsoft technologies, SQL reporting services, analysis services, Performance Point, etc. So I mentioned that we were legal focused, and I see a lot of familiar names joining us today, so a good chunk of you folks know us. But for those that don't, we're very aligned with ILTA. In fact, we're actually migrating ILTA as we speak from their on-prem environment to SharePoint Online. We also work with ARC. I speak at SharePoint Symposium. I was fortunate to be a nominee for the Vendor Thought Leader of the Year this year, and we do about 20 road shows and 2 or 3 webinars through ILTA as well. So very legal focused. So today's agenda, let's just jump right in. We've already done introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about cloud. Obviously, cloud means a lot of different things to different people, so we're going to level set there, make sure we're on the same page. We're going to do a one-slide high-level comparison of SharePoint Online versus on-prem to give you kind of a snapshot. We'll talk about security, feature parity, and then go through an actual cost analysis that we did for a 300 attorney law firm where we evaluated the cost of online versus on-prem, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay, so SharePoint Online. We want to nail down exactly what we mean, and as most of the folks on the phone probably already know, but as a refresher, there are really three main categories of cloud services. Infrastructure as a service, which is Microsoft Azure, Amazon EC2, those platforms where you're responsible for everything from the hypervisor up. So the operating system, if you're deploying SharePoint, you'd be responsible for deploying SQL, IIS, SharePoint, and managing that. It's not really that interesting of a conversation to talk about deploying SharePoint in an infrastructure as a service environment versus on-prem, because the only real difference is you don't have to manage the hardware for the most part. There's also platform as a service, which, that's SQL Azure, Windows Azure, Amazon's DynamoDB. Those scenarios are more kind of app dev focused. And then you have software as a service, which is what SharePoint Online is. And in that scenario, in this case, Microsoft manages all the updates for you, provides you with a administration user interface, and you have limited control of server and software updates, but you always have the latest version of the application. And that's what we're talking about today when we say SharePoint Online. So software as a service, this slide was from a SC Magazine survey back in March, where they polled 1,000 IT professionals from across different industries. And I think this gives a pretty good view into kind of where the world's going in terms of cloud. So 77% of the respondents are investing in some sort of public cloud infrastructure. We know that number is lower in legal, primarily because legal caters to many regulated industries that have restrictions around where that data can live. We're seeing more and more law firms go, not just talk about, but go to SharePoint Online. In fact, we're doing an AmLaw 50 migration as we speak. So we anticipate there's going to be a lot more public cloud infrastructure in the legal space. The graphic there in the middle with software as a service, 60% of respondents are leveraging software as a service, and to a lesser extent, platform and infrastructure as a service. And, like I mentioned on the previous slide, it's really the most compelling value proposition, because, IT departments want to get out of the business of managing patches and updates and, high availability, redundancy, disaster recovery, all those sorts of things, which software as a service does, or certainly should do, does in the case of SharePoint Online. And then the table over in the bottom left of the slide here, this was not a Microsoft funded survey, and it's pretty interesting if you look at where folks currently are versus where they're going. I think this was over the next 24 months. Office 365 within this sample is expected to almost double. And you can see that not all those platforms have that same trajectory. And, again, going back to the software as a service scenario, businesses don't want to manage commodity infrastructure like messaging, collaboration, those sorts of things. Hybrid at a minimum is something worth taking a look at, and we think you'll agree after today's presentation. Okay, so SharePoint Online, sometimes we refer to it as SPO for short. SPO is part of Office 365, and Office 365 is comprised of 5 back-end services: SharePoint Online, Link, which is now has been rebranded to Skype for Business, Exchange, which is messaging, OneDrive for Business, which is file storage and collaboration, and then Yammer, which is Microsoft's social networking platform. Those are really the 5 core services within Office 365. Office 365 also has, with their enterprise plans, they provide the option of licensing the Office desktop apps on a subscription basis. And we have at least a couple of firms that have Office 365 subscriptions solely for the desktop applications, so they can license those based on subscription. They don't even use the back-end services. So that's something to keep in mind. You always get the latest and greatest. If you're on Office 365 and you're part of the early adopter, you've designated your tenant as an early adopter, you already have the Office 2016 bits available to you. So it's a great way to stay current. Okay, this is the SPO versus on-prem kind of high-level snapshot, and how we came to the ratings that you're seeing here is we got all our SharePoint folks in a room and hammered this out. This isn't Microsoft data here. This is guys with lots of experience on the ground weighing in as to where each one of these categories lies with SPO and on-prem. On the security front, SharePoint Online security is very high, and we listed that first because that's one of the biggest concerns that law firms have when moving to a cloud-based platform like SPO. In the on-prem scenario, I like to use the analogy that when you buy SharePoint, Microsoft backs up a truck and dumps a big pile of lumber in your yard, and you can really build whatever you see fit with it. That could be a very scalable, secure infrastructure, or not so much. So that's really going to depend on on-prem, how you deploy it. Management features, SharePoint Online is multi-tenant, so just by the multi-tenant nature of things, you're going to have less management features available to you. And the reason is management functions can impact other tenants. SharePoint on-prem doesn't have those restrictions, and as Brian will show you, there's a lot more PowerShell commandlets available, and you have server-level access control, which you do not have in SharePoint Online. From a cost perspective, this is a slam dunk in every case I think we've ever evaluated. SharePoint Online is less expensive to deploy, and Brian will talk through a real-life cost analysis where we break that down number by number. On the search front, this is SharePoint Online versus SharePoint on-prem. We're not talking about hybrid just yet. I think Brian might touch on what some options there are from a hybrid perspective. But SharePoint out of the box, search is limited to whatever you have in Office 365. So you can search Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, etc. But anything else, if you want content to be crawled behind your firewall, you're going to need to be hybrid. On the on-prem front, search capabilities are robust. That's one of the most compelling features of SharePoint, and when you're on-prem, you can crawl just about any on-prem repository that you need to. On the BI front, we created this slide deck back in March, and we debated possibly reevaluating on the BI front because so much has happened. This is closer to a toss-up because Microsoft is really starting to innovate with Power BI. So in SharePoint Online, you have Power BI and Excel services at your disposal. And SharePoint on-prem, you have Performance Point, SQL reporting services, and Excel services at your disposal. So we would really need to evaluate what your BI requirements were to point you in the right direction, but Microsoft is definitely focusing their innovation online. Social, it's, Yammer is in the cloud, and you can integrate if you have on-prem. I think you need SQL 2013 SP1 and up, and Yammer integration will work. Online, it just works out of the box, so SPO gets the nod there. Mobile, it's the same scenario. So you can have mobile views on-prem, but you're out of the box. You're going to need to, if you're following best practices, you're going to need to stand up a DMZ and a web front end, and there's some additional work that you have to do. Mobile just works out of the box with SharePoint Online. On the customization front, the scenario is a bit reversed. So deploying code-based customizations, and by that I mean custom app parts. Microsoft's now calling them add-ins, SharePoint add-ins. If you're going to deploy custom add-ins in SharePoint Online, you're limited to what's called the SharePoint app model. And the app model is a different way of doing SharePoint development. It's not necessarily more limiting, but it is different. And you no longer can deploy full trust web parts, which is how you do it on-prem. If you're on-prem, you can go app model or full trust. So we gave on-prem the nod there with respect to customization. On the scalability front, SharePoint Online is highly scalable. We stood up a 8,000 seat tenant in a day. That would take weeks or possibly longer if you were to deploy an enterprise-grade farm of that size on-prem. Third-party support is much more limited in SharePoint Online. I know there's several vendors in legal that are claiming that their stuff is ready for prime time, and in our experience, that's not necessarily the case. So if you do go down that road and you have third-party products that you want to deploy, I would not just ask the vendors if they're ready. I would ask them to show you. On-prem, the picture is very different. All the third-party controls there are mature and ready for prime time for the most part. Okay, so let's talk about security, because that's everybody's number one concern typically. I always like to start out with just kind of an apples-to-apples comparison. And if somebody says, yeah, I'm worried about security in the cloud, my question back is, okay, well, what are you doing about security on-prem? And these are some check boxes that you may want to look at. Is your firm doing port scanning and pen testing, just-in-time security elevations, all of these sorts of things? And if the answer is yes, then you're doing better than most. Microsoft can check all of these boxes with SharePoint Online. So that's just something to consider when you're sizing up security. We would encourage you to look at what's being done on-prem versus what's being done in SharePoint Online. And a testament to gaps in the control environments at law firms, and it's not just law firms. I mean, we hear about new breaches every day. There was an article in Bloomberg in March that estimated that 80% of the AmLaw 100 have had some sort of a data breach. And they didn't define what data breach is, so that's very broad terminology. That could be anything from somebody lost a unencrypted laptop with customer data, all the way to there was a full Trojan horse that infiltrated the network. But 80% is a big number, so something to keep in mind. To date, we know about a total of 0 Office 365 breaches. So just something to think about when you're evaluating security. And as part of that SC Magazine survey, 90% of the respondents were either very concerned or moderately concerned about security. And that makes sense. the question really becomes are those concerns warranted? So from a SharePoint Online perspective, this is in the graphic below, the alphabet soup of security certifications that Microsoft has. You've got GLBA, FISMA, ISO 27001. What's the feasibility of a law firm to get all of these certifications? I mean, I know of several firms that are pursuing ISO 27001. SSAE 16's really become table stakes in the data center world. But many of these others, the bar is pretty high to get over. So this is something I would encourage folks to consider when they're evaluating security as well. Okay, so Microsoft calls it data loss prevention. I like to call it data loss protection because it doesn't prevent you from, this feature does not prevent you from losing data. What it is it's a detective control that Microsoft has defined approximately 50 sensitive data types. This includes like social security numbers, passport numbers, credit card, dates of birth, those sorts of things. And then you can spin up a eDiscovery Center site and find out where that data lives within your environment, both in OneDrive, that's embedded within documents within your SharePoint infrastructure, and then you can evaluate the security controls around that sensitive data. So a very useful feature. As of today, it's only available in SharePoint Online. However, Microsoft has stated, we haven't seen it yet, that DLP will be part of SharePoint 2016. So that capability will reside on-prem as well when SharePoint 2016 gets released in early second quarter. And we actually have a webinar, I think it's maybe the second week of December, where we talk about what's new in SharePoint 2016. So I would keep my eye out for that invite from ILTA because that's a great presentation as well that we'll hope you'll join. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brian Goff to talk about URLs.
All right, thank you, Ted. So continuing with some of the differences between cloud and on-prem. So if you are looking at moving into the cloud, one of the areas you will need to consider is some of the restrictions around managed paths. So with SharePoint on premises, you're able to create your own managed paths to help organize your content for you. Within SharePoint Online, you basically have two options as of today. I'm sorry? So you basically
we lost you just for a second, but you're back now.
Okay, all right, thank you. So we basically have two managed path options at this point in time with SharePoint Online. You have a managed path of sites and teams. So this is something to consider in your migration plan. Is this going to have an impact in your world, or is, most people that we've seen, typically use the sites and maybe one other. So it will vary from location to location, what kind of an impact this will have on you. But we wanted to make you aware of it. Ted mentioned earlier about some of the PowerShell limitations with the cloud. So we naturally will see far fewer commandlets available just because, again, as Ted mentioned, you're in a multi-tenant environment when you're on the cloud. So a lot of the capabilities and, especially around some of the search customizations won't be available to you when you're working with SharePoint Online. So that naturally will decrease the number of commandlets. They are improving. So, as the time we wrote this, there were about 30 online commandlets. I believe that's, has been increased to maybe 40 or 45. So they're definitely adding more capabilities for what you can do in SharePoint Online, but just because of the nature of the beast, you're always going to be more limited than what you can do with SharePoint on-prem. If, again, you're something that you're looking at for your developer, something to keep in mind is that the commandlets may have different names and work differently. So the example that we give here is the get SP site, so to return all the site collections. That includes the my sites. When you go to SharePoint Online, the command is slightly different. So you have the get SPO site. That returns the site collections, but not the My Sites, because they handle the My Sites differently in SharePoint Online than they do with SharePoint On-Prem. So just to show some of the differences in the syntax for the commands and even what you might expect to return from those commands. With availability, so SharePoint Online, they've greatly improved, and with the number of data centers that they have across the United States, the high availability has been tremendous. So Microsoft is guaranteeing at least the 99.9% of uptime. I know in the earlier stages they definitely had some issues, a couple of outages that were rather lengthy, but we haven't seen any of those issues for quite some time. And I believe in the past or the first quarter of 2015, I believe they received at least 4 nines or 6 nines for uptime. So they've improved that tremendously. The availability for the data that you're backing up, replicating the data across 2 data centers at any time is making that much nicer for being able to recover and capture your data. Having it spread across the multiple data centers also helps with your user experience. So if you are someone that has users spread across the United States, when you are accessing your SharePoint Online site, your request is going to be directed to the closest data center to give your end users the best experience possible. So if you're on the West Coast and you make a request, it's not going to send you to the data center all the way across on the East Coast. It's going to send it to the closest data center for you. The backup strategy, so generally your data is also backed up approximately every 12 hours and is retained for 14 days. So if you do need to get some information that's missing, you're able to reach out to Microsoft. Now that's above and beyond your normal recycle bin. So you still have the recycle bin in place with SharePoint, the SharePoint Online, and I believe it's a 90 days recycle bin. So out of the box and you're on-prem, I believe it's set to 30 days. So with the administration interfaces, so we mentioned how there's a change there. So we show the on-prem. This is a little quick screenshot of what on-prem central admin looks like, and then what the admin center looks like for SharePoint Online. So radically different, and again, just the nature of the beast. With SharePoint Online, you definitely have fewer options, right? So the interface still giving you, and they're, as they add features with SharePoint Online, naturally this menu changes and grows to meet those demands and for whatever additional features are being offered. But again, with SharePoint Online in the multi-tenant world, you're still going to have some different limitations for it. And this is going to be a little bit of a learning curve as well. So letting people know what is different with the admin center. So your SharePoint admins may have a small learning curve just to get used to the new UI interface. So search, we mentioned again, was a bit more robust for on-premise. So some of the areas that we look at is, the full set of options for crawling content when you're on premises, and you have different options for how you're crawling it. Is it going to be an incremental crawl, doing full crawls, the continuous crawls? The options that you have for SharePoint Online, everything is continuous crawl. So these are, again, depending on your environment and how much control you're expecting for the various content, you kind of have, it's nice that with continuous crawl, what that means is the content is crawled every 15 minutes. So 15 minutes after adding a document, if somebody searches for it, it should already be indexed and available to be returned in search results. If you're on premise, there it depends. Are you setting up your crawls to be done after hours? So typically your large full crawls and incremental crawls are done after hours because search is so resource intensive that it could have an impact on the end user's performance for day-to-day work that they're doing. So how quickly do you need to get access to that content and how much control? So we have some differences there. Pros and cons, which ones you think will be an issue and which one you think won't be. Business intelligence, again, we kind of, when we first started putting this together, it still is something of a toss-up between, what's going to be available, the different data sources that you have. Do you need to be working with, cubes and different SQL data stores, consuming the information from third-party data stores? So you can have, a bit more of a robust option when it's on-prem, again, because of the amount of control you have. However, with the innovation that they're doing with SharePoint Online. I know they recently announced that they released another 44 features for Power BI, which is the online business intelligence tool. So that's definitely where their focus is. They want to do more, and it's kind of cloud first is the mindset that they have. So we're going to do cloud first innovations, and some of the features that they're making available with SharePoint Online, they are looking at making available with on-prem releases, but definitely not everything. There are a number of areas where it's available for SharePoint Online, and that's the only place you'll be able to get it. So seeing that innovation, we're leaning a bit more that, on the BI side, it's starting to look a little bit more like SharePoint Online is going to become the winner in that race. Yammer. So again, Yammer is online and forever will be from everything we're hearing. There's been no conversations about trying to move and make Yammer available in an on-premise deployment, if you will. Now, if you have an on-prem installation of SharePoint, you can reach out and still connect to Yammer. You can still sync up your, get the single sign-on and have your users leverage that space and share content back and forth. But that content that's in Yammer is in the cloud. Yammer exists in the cloud and always will. So it's a bit of a hybrid scenario that you have there. But again, when you're in SharePoint Online, that connection and the interoperability between the two environments is definitely much more seamless and much nicer between SharePoint Online and your SharePoint on-prem rollout. Some other areas, and this kind of demonstrates again, some of the changes in what they're doing with SharePoint Online and features that are available online but won't be available in your on-prem rollout. So some of what they're doing is around with Office Graph and then using Office Delve to surface some information. So they're capturing and looking at all the different sources of data that you have with Yammer, your emails, the document libraries, all your SharePoint content that you're working with. Grabbing that and keeping track and kind of being able to see, is this one of your peers? Is it managers? Who else within the organization? How far removed are you from this person based upon a variety of different algorithms, with your geographic location, your role in the company, right? So, and then Office Delve is being used to help surface and keep track of a lot of the content. So this is one way that people are leveraging this to be kept up to date as new content is being added, as libraries are being done, or attachments to emails are being sent back and forth between you and your employees and other members. This content is then being surfaced through Office Delve and giving you a nice way to look at and be kept up to date. What content is being modified, who's modifying it, what that content is, what's being shared with people. So it gives it in this nice magazine kind of format with the different bubbles to give highlights and different icons being used to designate what type of content this is. Is it coming from an email attachment? Are they SharePoint documents? What type of document, right? So this is becoming a more and more popular interface, and it's an interface that is customizable. There are certain ways that you can tweak and work with some different pages and get some different views on this to really get something that's a bit more robust, a bit more dynamic to meet your particular needs within your environment. And as we mentioned, again, thinking about that, what emails are going back and forth and all the content, it is still enforcing the security. So if there's content that's being worked on that, in a document library, you will see this information when you go out to your My Site area and look at the Delve data. But if other folks, don't have access to that content, you've restricted it through the SharePoint permissionings, then they won't see it show up in their Office Delve. Now, naturally, Microsoft is, they're still tracking where it is as far as the demographic and, its location to you, right? Its relevance to you. But if you're not able to see the content, it won't be displayed in your Delve area. With mobility, again, since Microsoft Online is exactly that, it's already in the cloud. So leveraging, the URLs, mycompany.com is going to send you out to that online version of your site because it's already online. You already have access to it, so you don't have the extra work of setting up the DMZs and the different proxies and extra hardware that Ted mentioned earlier. So with online accessibility, you definitely are getting that. You're able to grab that view, and they've been putting a lot of time and effort into improving the mobile look and feel for when you're going out to your SharePoint Online sites. So again, just that's one of the other benefits that kind of helps, and we touch on it again a little bit later. It's just that infrastructure, having to maintain that infrastructure to make your sites and your content available to people outside of your data center, outside of your domain, right? So there can be a lot of work and a lot of headaches around that, and additional risk. What holes are you poking through your firewall to get people access, and make sure people are monitoring that and keeping an eye on it in case people are trying to hack your system. So much easier, much cleaner interface. No extra effort for you to set up for your SharePoint Online, getting access to it. Now, with that said, we wanted to show a sample. So there's still, through mobile interfaces. What we're showing here is a proof of concept piece that we did for a law firm. And their scenario was basically they had some practice areas, and they wanted some of the partners and senior attorneys to be able to easily access and be kept up to date on when content was being added or modified on some specific practice pages. So we leveraged, some of the new capabilities, the design and development capabilities with SharePoint, and created our own little online app that reached out to that particular site and was then able to bring back some information to let them know, here are the announcements, or here are the documents, what changes and what information is being updated on that particular site. This balancing with your mobile device management, your MDM software, so that you can control what information is being put on your employees' mobile phones. So this kind of shows how you can do the branding to get a customized look and feel for it. You're still leveraging your MDM to help control the security, to make sure what documents people can download, if they can even download it, emailing it, sending it out. So you still can leverage all that capability to help control and make sure that people aren't sending information to unauthorized or unqualified people for it. And that a little bit nicer, since you're on that phone, have that mobile, you now can leverage things, such as the badges, right? So now you'll just get the notifications on your phone to let you know if there's new content. So, again, that's that usability, and it's a little bit easier for the folks, so they're not having to constantly log on to a SharePoint site and look, has anything changed, what's new. You get those notifications right out to your phone through the mobile application. So and I know we have a couple of questions, so hopefully this will cover some of your questions that you've posed for us with the cost savings. So what we have here is a comparison that we did. We have a little engine Excel document that we've worked up to calculate some of the costs and do a comparison between your on-premise licenses and your SharePoint Online costs. The numbers that we're showing here is based on a 300 user farm, if you will. So attorneys and a law firm with 300 employees. It's in both the attorneys, partners, everyone in the company that's going to need access to the SharePoint sites. And this is over a 5-year period. So we're kind of giving some of the numbers as far as what was the cost at this time for your SharePoint 2013 server licenses, the cows that you'll need for the number of employees, SQL Server costs, and an area that's a little bit it varies obviously from firm to firm, but what are the labor costs? So we know there's going to be some labor costs, some additional costs, since you have to maintain the hardware, all the patching, the infrastructure, right? All that still needs to be maintained by an employee. So we needed to have something to accommodate and allow for that cost. The number may vary depending upon your world. So we just, as a starting point here, this is based on a $100,000 a year salary that we wanted to work with it. Those costs, for maintaining the patches, your cumulative updates, all the hardware. If you're in SharePoint Online, you don't have that overhead. So that's one of the areas where you can get, a big savings. Now, what we show here is the cost for your SharePoint Online costs is, again, depending on your subscription. So this one is based on a SharePoint Plan 2 subscription. Is basically $8 per month per user. Now, we also include, you have to have, when you're in SharePoint Online, you have to have at least one tenant admin, which makes sense. You got to have somebody have the keys to the car to be able to get in there and do what you need to do. So from there on, it's $8 per person per month. We calculate that out to the 5-year. And for storage, you get, and I believe the numbers are kind of changing a little bit, but basically you get some basic storage based upon the number of users that you have. So for each authenticated or each user that you've added and licensed to your world, you get, I believe it was 10 gigabytes of space. So 10 times whatever number of active employees you have, that's what you get for space for free as part of your subscription that you're paying. Now, if you need any additional storage, right now the price is looking at about 20 cents per gigabyte per month. So it's pretty cheap for the storage that you might need. And depending upon your license, what your relationship is with Microsoft, you might be able to get that cost down. But right now, what they advertise on their website was 20 cents per gigabyte per user per month. So as you can see with the numbers there, the total cost over a 5-year period, radically different. Less than half going SharePoint Online versus SharePoint on-prem. For migration, so there are a number of different implications to keep in mind. So some of the areas, like we mentioned earlier with the number of managed paths that you have available, is that an impact on your world? What do you have for workflows? We know regardless of whether you're moving from on-prem to on-prem or on-prem to cloud, if you do have some workflows running, those are some areas that you need some special care. Need to take a look at what you're going to be doing there and what you're going to have happen. Okay. One of the big keys to help with success, as with anything, is communication. Right? Are you keeping your users informed on what's going on and what's going to happen? When are you going to be doing this? What kind of information can you get to them? The more information you can get to your users and the earlier you get to it, the easier that transition is going to be for them, right? So keeping them informed, help alleviate their fears as quickly and as easily as you can. The third-party vendors that Ted mentioned before, that's definitely something to keep an eye on. So just because of the maturity of the SharePoint on-prem environment, there are far more products available for on-prem than there are for SharePoint Online. Now, that number is growing tremendously, so we're seeing more vendors come on board, and even some of your, the more common vendors, such as Bamboo Solutions, they're making more and more offerings for SharePoint Online, in addition to SharePoint on-prem. So it's definitely a growing market. We're seeing more and more, but it's something you definitely need to look at is what third-party products do you already have installed in your on-prem? And if you're going to the cloud, is there another solution for that for the cloud? How critical is that? What impact is that going to have on your end users or your business overall if you aren't able to replicate that capability in your SharePoint Online environment? Okay. With that migration, looking at what content is there, what you can and can't do, a hybrid deployment may make some sense for you. So, Ted mentioned earlier about, we've had a number of customers that, they really are out there, but they're not taking advantage of the back-end services. They're doing it to, to get the desktop services. That was a big savings for them, and, it really made it their lives a bit easier, not having to manage that process and worry about that. And the CAL cost was, considerably less for them. So kind of ties into that is, with that migration process, so a lot of it can be, is impacted upon, what is the current state of your farm right now? right? So we have a product that we offer is a SharePoint MD. And what this does is enables us to give a complete audit of your existing on-prem SharePoint environment. So we can look at this and use that to help identify what are some problem areas. Is your search running too slow? You having problems with user profile interface, etc. So we'll do a complete audit, give you full report. I mean, the report is huge. It'll give you more information than you're ever going to want, but we don't want to keep something from you. We're going to give you everything, and you can dig through it and determine what is relevant for you. So you get a massive amount of documentation about your farm, what its current situation is, and even recommendations on how to fix some of the issues. We'll let you know. We'll kind of analyze it for you and say, yep, here are the top 10 things that, if there are 10 things, but here are the top 10 areas that we think are critical and you need to address in your farm, immediately, whether you're going to migrate or not. So this could be a great tool for you to leverage to help get an idea of what is the current state of your farm and how viable is it at this point. This product we offer, it's a set price of $2,000. So that kind of helps with your budgeting and you're doing your planning. So if this is something that you think might be of interest to you and be of value to you, maybe you can start working on working that into your budget. A part of that is the analysis that we do is also looking at, because we know there are certain things with some limitations when you go to the cloud. So if you are looking at the cloud migration, then we're able to do some analysis on those specific pain points that we're aware of to help bring those to your attention as well. So these libraries are much too large. You're going to have some issues with certain workflows, whatever the case may be. So if you are giving serious consideration to doing your migration, this would probably be a very excellent first start. So it's great to know what your current state is so you know what to expect when you move on to future state. So that concludes our presentation. Ted, do you have some other areas that you might want to mention? I know we have a few questions that we wanted to address.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with. Let's go ahead and jump into the questions there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Ted and Brian. I have a few housekeeping items, and then we can hit the questions, okay? All right.
Okay.
Once again, Ted and Brian, thank you. The presentation is great information. And everyone, please utilize the Adobe Connect Q&A box for your comments or questions. And I'd also like to mention that a copy of the PowerPoint document and a link to the recording will be on our website in a few days. Shortly after the webinar, you will receive a request for you to evaluate today's webinar. Please take a few minutes and to provide us your feedback. This information is very vital to us, and it keeps providing educational webinars to our members. All right, let's start with the questions. I have a question from Hope. In terms of cost, how are external users licensed in SharePoint Online?
External users are free. Sorry. Yeah, so the external users right now, you get unlimited external users. And for those who may not know, so what the external user is, it's not somebody that's part of your Active Directory or part of your licensed users, but you do still have the capability of sharing content from your SharePoint Online with those external users. So if it's some vendors or other firms that you need to work with outside of your environment, rather than setting up the whole extranet process, it's SharePoint Online is it's already a built-in extranet. So you can share at several levels. You can share content at the site level, you can share at the library level, or you can share at the item level, share just a specific document with a particular person. So, but those external users, there's no additional cost for the external users.
Okay, and Hope has another question. In terms of cost, how does SharePoint Online storage cost compare to the cost of Premier storage?
Currently, for SharePoint Online, as we mentioned, showed in our one slide, is 20 cents per gigabyte per month. Comparing that to your on-prem storage, that would be a bit difficult to say because it depends on what is your on-prem storage. Are you using, SAN devices? Is it, hardware that you own, or are you renting? Exactly what is your scenario? So you'd have to do a bit more of an analysis on your on-prem cost per gigabyte, and do your own cost analysis. Unfortunately, I don't think I'd be able to answer that without more details about it. But for on-prem currently, it's the 20 cents per gigabyte per month.
Okay. Ted, I think you're going to answer the question on this. Can we pick the data centers? Can we be certain that the data will stay in the USA?
Yeah, and that's a good question and a complex one. So by default, when you stand up an Office 365 tenant, Microsoft uses your billing address as the default data center. As you saw from that map that Brian had on the screen, there are currently in North America, the only data centers that exist are in the U.S. However, in 2016, Microsoft's planning on opening 2 data centers in Canada. What I've been told is that there will be an option where users in North America can limit their data replication to just within the U.S. or just within Canada. Obviously with all the NSA issues and whatnot, we know that's a big deal for Canadian firms. And what we've been told, we haven't seen the UI because the data centers don't exist yet, but we've been told that you'll be able to control where that data is replicated. And if you have additional questions, there are a few wrinkles. If you want to reach out to us, you can just hit up info@acrowire.com. We can walk through some scenarios. There's also a website out there. It's called Where's My Data that Microsoft hosts that gives you a little bit more detail. But yeah, reach out if you've got additional questions on that.
Okay, and I think in your answer, you answered if there are other data centers in other countries, correct?
Yeah, there are. So yeah, Microsoft has data centers all over the world, North and South America, Asia, Pacific, Japan, Australia. So yeah, they are all over the world and growing. New ones are popping up all the time.
Okay. The next question I have is it difficult to set up client team sites in SharePoint Online?
I'll let Brian take that.
Okay. If I'm understanding the question, I think when you say client team sites, that makes me think again external users, right? So if you are going with just the external users, setting up the site is no trouble at all. You create your SharePoint sites just like you would in an on-prem world or any other team site. Then it's just a matter of adding the external clients to the appropriate SharePoint group, say like your members group, right? Or just read-only, depending on what level of access you want them to have. And it's sending out those invitations to those folks. Now, something to keep in mind, for full disclosure, if you will, inviting those external users to have access to your site. It is a very simple process, but what you need to keep in mind is what email are you sending that, right? Because you're going to email it to somebody, and based upon that email, what that user then has to do is they are basically going to be creating the equivalent of a Microsoft Live ID based on that email. So that's something you need to take into consideration. Speak with your clients, your vendors, whomever you're, are looking at sharing as external users. There could be some impact there. Does Bank of America, want you to be doing this, or any other large companies? Are their employees allowed to do something like that? So that can have an impact on whether it's available or a viable option for you. So the direct answer to the question is super easy to set up the sites, super easy to invite and add those people to the various SharePoint groups, your external users. But you also have to keep in mind the management of those external users. If you've invited somebody from client A and that employee leaves the company, how do you know that? You're having that communication because you've given that email address for that person access to your site. If that employee leaves client A, you don't know about it, and that email address is still has permission to your site. So management of that, keeping in that communications open and planning the process for that is something that's very important, something you'll need to keep in mind.
Okay, great. Our next question comes from Matt, and it is, with SharePoint Online, do you have a solution to publish iManage shortcuts which link back to our on-premise installation of iManage?
Sure. This is Ted. I'll take that. So we partner with Prosperaware, who does this on-prem with an out-of-the-box solution. It's my understanding that the product is called Acera. It's my understanding that Acera is not there yet from a SharePoint Online perspective. However, this is very doable. What you would do is you would create what's called a provider-hosted SharePoint app part and point that at whatever content. It could be eDocs, it could be iManage, it could be World Docs, it could be a file share. That would reside on your side of the firewall, and then it would get rendered in a SharePoint page in the form of a web part. So that's something that we have built that exact scenario, but for a different DMS. We could probably port that over pretty easy to interact with iManage, but we need to see the requirements. So short answer is I don't know of anything off the shelf today, but if it's something that's important to you, that's something we could build. We've already got the starting foundation for that.
And Ted, I think this is an add-on to the question you just answered. Matt wants to know, would this work for a client extranet?
Would that app part for iManage work with it for a client extranet? And the answer is absolutely. I would think that would be the whole reason why you would do it. I guess you could do it on an internal matter-centric page as well, but yeah, that would work. That would work fine. We'd have to talk through permissioning, how that gets managed for your external users for iManage, but very doable. Just need to have a conversation.
Okay, great.
Devil's in the
Thanks,
details.
he'll be in touch. Okay. The next question is from Charles. With SharePoint Online, do you have the ability to link data from internal resources, both raw data and third-party web parts? How would this be accomplished?
And Brian, I'll take that one too. So that's a very similar scenario to what we just spoke about with respect to iManage. So the new SharePoint app model allows you to host the rendering of the app parts, or I'll call them web parts, so we're using terminology people are familiar with. That gets hosted internally and then gets rendered in a SharePoint web part control in SharePoint Online. So that's kind of a hybrid scenario. Another way that you can bring on-prem resources to SharePoint Online is through the use of BCS. So let's say you had a SQL database that you wanted to expose records to external users through SharePoint Online. Essentially, you just put a service layer over top of your database, and you can wire that service layer up directly to BCS, which is Business Connectivity Services, in SharePoint Online. So that's another avenue. There are a ton of ways to skin this cat, and we've been down just about every path. So I'd be glad to talk through that with you, but the short answer is yes.
Okay, and we have one more question. David asked, in a 100% online scenario, I'm a bit worried that third-party solutions working today won't be the next upgrade of SharePoint Online. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't mind jumping in on that one too, Brian, and then
Okay.
if you have feedback, you can weigh in. So in a 100% online scenario, if the third-party solution is built with the app model, it will absolutely work with the next version of SharePoint Online. So that's the whole point of the app model. It's a loosely coupled interface, and Microsoft that's the whole value proposition of the app model, is that it doesn't break every time you upgrade SharePoint. So if you have a web part that's built using the app model in SharePoint Online, it's not going to break when Microsoft makes updates unless Microsoft breaks their commitment. So I think it's safe to expect that customizations will not break.
And the fact, you state that you're a 100% online scenario. So, really right now with SharePoint Online, there's, SharePoint 2016 is on the horizon, right? I mean, it's right around the corner. For those who are using SharePoint Online, you're already running like SharePoint 2015 in 3/4. You've got a lot of the features and capabilities that's going to be released in SharePoint 2016. Because with SharePoint Online, as we mentioned, it's constantly rolling out and doing the updates and giving the information. So with SharePoint Online, you don't have the experience of, hey, I'm now going to upgrade, if you will, to a new version. They let you know that some new features are being rolled out and everything. So that, just that whole life cycle is quite different with SharePoint Online. But again, as Ted said, that the Microsoft's contract, with those app models and those applications that are existing and running in SharePoint Online, yeah, they'll continue to run as they roll out some of their changes.
Okay, well, once again, thanks to AcroWire for sponsoring this, and I can't thank Ted and Brian. This was a great webinar. So everyone else, keep an eye on ILTA's website, www.iltanet.org, under the meeting tabs for any upcoming webinars and meeting info. We look forward to seeing you on future webinars. And remember, as ILTA's Executive Director, Randy Mays, always says, tell a friend about ILTA. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.